Shout out to Ring RQ, Julius, you legend. We're going to do a joint interview, yeah? Yeah, we'll do a joint interview, Julius. Thanks for the support. You're a legend. From your girls, Raven and Ellie.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this upcoming weekend on the undercard of Liam Smith's upcoming boxer debut. Natasha Jonas, reigning newly crowned WBO junior middleweight champion, will be taking on Sweden's own unbeaten champion,
unbeaten WBC champion, Patricia Berghult.
Let's get down to brass tacks. Natasha Jonas sports a professional record of 11 wins, 2 losses with 1 draw,
8 knockouts, having been stopped at least once many years ago by Brazil's own murderess Vivian Obanov.
Whereas Patricia, she sports an unblemished record of 15 wins, no losses, no draws, 3 knockouts.
It's an unblemished record, yeah, but she hasn't been fighting the kind of fighters that Natasha Jonas has been fighting,
which can contribute to less hiccups and less setbacks in a fighter's professional CV, professional record. Patricia Berghult is approximately 10 years younger than Natasha Jonas, a very spry 28 years old to Natasha.
Natasha's a very vibrant 38 years old, though the woman doesn't look a day over 30.
She takes care of herself. We know that this fight, this unification match, is a byproduct of Haney, this division's reigning WBA champion, making the decision to take on Terry Harpier instead of Natasha Jonas. Initially, the plan was for Natasha to unify with Haney.
Haney decided to go fight Terry, so Patricia Berghult is standing in her place, and Patricia actually beat Haney
in a competitive fight a little over 2 years ago in 2019.
So at least on paper, this is a better fight than the Haney fight would have been. At least on paper it is.
Can Natasha Jonas, Ms. Great Britain, pull this off?
Because this isn't like the Chris Namas fight. This ain't like Chris Namas standing in on short notice for what was supposed to be Eva Pietrzkowska.
I understand that in that fight, Natasha Jonas delivered a highlight reel knockout, but it's important to note that Chris Namas did take that fight on short notice.
This is different.
Now, both Natasha and Patricia have seen action in the last 12 months. Patricia last saw action late last year in November against Olivia Belkacem, who she beat on points.
Natasha saw action more recently in February of this year. Chris Namas fight I just talked about.
So with both fighters, both champions, having seen action in the last 12 months, neither fighter has any ring rust or cobwebs they need to shake off.
We know Natasha Jonas isn't a full-fledged junior middleweight. We know that she's campaigned as low as 130 pounds, and she only recently moved up to this division.
I mean, we know that. We know that Patricia Berghult is the naturally bigger fighter, and Natasha Jonas, in many ways, isn't a true blue junior middleweight. But I think
that being the naturally smaller fighter might work to her advantage here.
It might. Natasha, being the naturally smaller fighter, it might give her an added edge in quickness and speed, athleticism, and coordination. Patricia Berghult, to the eye, is a solid little fighter. She's solid, semi-solid, but there are holes there. I'd wager that Natasha Jonas will be able to beat her to the punch because she's naturally smaller.
Tack on that Patricia Berghult is an orthodox fighter, whereas Natasha's a southpaw.
We know how tricky those southpaws can be, staying just on the outside of an orthodox fighter's jab, lining them up for that straight left hand, that southpaw's backhand.
Because I think Natasha's a little faster, I think she will be able to beat Patricia Berghult to the punch and get off her shots.
And land that backhand. Patricia Berghult might very well be a bona fide junior middleweight, a solid one. But the difference in height, the difference in reach, the tail of the tape, it's not a dramatic difference between Natasha and Patricia. Not really. Not so dramatic that Natasha Jonas can't get off her straight shots safely.
I think she can, because this ain't Mary Spencer we're talking about.
This isn't a fighter that's so much bigger, so much more statuesque than Natasha, that Natasha would have to step within striking distance just to get off a shot. For what it's worth, the tail of the tape, it's not a dramatic difference between Natasha and Patricia.
Patricia is the naturally bigger fighter, but she's the bigger fighter in terms of build, in terms of frame, not necessarily height.
I can see Natasha Jonas getting off those straight shots out of the southpaw stance from the outside coming in, potentially flustering Patricia Berghult, who doesn't seem to be very...
She doesn't seem too comfortable mid-range to inside when a fighter's crowding her.
Between the punches, between the shots, in the exchange, I think that Patricia Berghult can be caught. She can be hit.
And I reiterate, because I think Natasha Jonas will have a slight speed advantage.
I think she'll beat Patricia to the punch. I think that Natasha will not dispatch Patricia quite as abruptly as she did Chris Namis, because I reiterate, this is not a short notice fight. This is not a short notice opponent.
Patricia has had ample time to prepare for this fight.
I do anticipate that Natasha will have to work a little harder against Patricia than she did against Chris Namis, though ultimately I am going with Natasha Jonas to win this thing. I am going with Natasha Jonas to win conservatively on points. I don't rule out a knockout, you understand. I don't rule out a stoppage. But Patricia Berghult is an unbeaten fighter who's 10 years younger than Natasha, so it's conceivable that she could very well go the distance with her.
It's more likely than not.
A knockout could happen in theory, because I do anticipate Natasha Jonas will be faster to the eye, getting off the cleaner, clearer shots.
Could happen, but I am going to be conservative with this one, and I'm going to go with Natasha Jonas on points to pry the green belt away from Patricia Berghult this weekend.
I think she's going to do it. I think she's going to win those titles and see herself crowned a unified champion in today's junior middleweight division. So that's who I'm going with. Natasha Jonas on points. In men's lightweight news, per Boxing Insider Rick Garcia, being told if undisputed 135-pound champion Devin Haney beats George Kambosos in the rematch, Haney may move up to 140. But even if Haney stays at 135, he won't be taking on Loma. This version of Loma that Haney won't fight will be 35 in February and has a lot of wear on those tires.
We know that Lomachenko is set to be returning in the fall against Ortiz.
And the night of the fight, it will have been approximately a year's time since Lomachenko last saw action. He's not getting any younger. It's reality.
This Ortiz kid, he's a former sparring partner of his. It's not uncommon to see
two former sparring partners share the ring under the hot lights. That's essentially what Deontay Wilder's about to do with Robert Helenius, a former sparring partner of his. We know that Tyson Fury and Dillian Whyte, ways back, they were former sparring partners that ended up meeting up.
Yeah, they ended up fighting. It's not uncommon. It happens.
It's about to happen for Lomachenko when he returns in the fall against Ortiz. We've got to get a look at that guy to assess the threat level he poses to the reigning undisputed champion. As I'm confident, George, he can't change much between fights. I expect the second fight to go more or less the same way that the first one did. And if it does, and Devin Haney keeps those belts, what Rick is saying is...
He's not going to fight Lomachenko. Whether he stays at 135 or moves up to 140, that fight ain't going to happen. That's what he's hearing.
But how could he stay at 135 pounds and not fight Lomachenko when, if Lomachenko makes it through his upcoming fight, he will be Devin Haney's mandatory challenger by way of the WBO, more or less. He's in a pole position to challenge him.
Challenge him for the brown belt.
We know this is what Bob Arum wants. We know this is what Bob Arum has wanted all along.
He's wanted to match the winner of this rematch with Lomachenko upon his return.
There are few fights out there, very few fights for the winner of this fight, the rematch, I should say, between Devin Haney and George Kambosos that yield the same commercial value as a Lomachenko fight. What could be a Lomachenko pay-per-view? I think
Bob would have to offer Devin Haney something substantial in order to get him in the ring with Lomachenko. I think he'd have to offer him more than what he's about to make for George.
What he already made with George in their first fight, an estimated $2.8 million, and whatever he stands to make in this rematch. I expect that as the defending undisputed lightweight champion, it would take a little more than just that to get Devin in the ring with Lomachenko, as this is a more challenging opponent than George Kambosos Jr.
That goes without saying. You think it isn't?
An exact dollar amount escapes me, but I don't know. Maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe even 5 million. 5 million guaranteed, 5 million upfront to make the fight happen. And as far as Lomachenko, he'll make whatever concessions he has to make in order to get that opportunity, get Devin Haney in the ring. I think that's what it's going to take, but according to Rick, Boxing Insider Rick Garcia, he's hearing that fight ain't going to happen, and that's disappointing.
I mean, if that story checks out, then what's Bill doing the round shooting his mouth off for?
What's that all about? You're trashing this guy and bad-mouthing him with no intention to fight him? I don't mind a bit of banter and a bit of trash talk. I don't expect either Bill Haney or Devin Haney to be overly gracious with a potential opponent like a Lomachenko.
I'm okay with the trash talk as long as you're going to fight him.
But if he doesn't? This conversation, having become what it's become, as polarizing as it is, as many content creators who have
all the misinformation that's regularly spread in reference to that potential fight, Lomachenko versus Haney.
Content creators who would have you believe that Vasyl Lomachenko swerved Devin Haney for this Ortiz kid. They'd have you believe that it could have been Vasyl Lomachenko versus Devin Haney in the fall, even though it was already reported as far back as March, before Devin Haney even beat George Kambosos.
It was already reported that George had a rematch clause that would have required Devin, if he won,
to return to Australia to face George for a second time. It was already reported that Devin's on the hook for at least 2 fights. He's not at liberty to face anyone else. He's not at liberty to fight a Vasyl Lomachenko, for example.
As far back as March, it was already well known that this Devin Haney versus George Kambosos thing might result in 2 fights, not just 1.
Shortly after dropping that lopsided decision to Devin, George Kambosos activated his rematch clause a little over a week later, after losing that fight, after dropping that decision.
So that whole narrative, that whole idea that Vasyl Lomachenko swerved Devin Haney in the fall, Devin Haney's not available to fight him in the fall. He's got to fight George again, but this
is the fight I've been waiting for. This is the fight I wanted. The long-awaited, long-anticipated showdown between Devin Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko. I was hoping that this entire George Kambosos situation would permeate into a bigger and better fight between those 2 fighters. And if it turns out that Devin's going to leave the lightweight division, or he's going to vacate the WBO title and surrender it to Vasyl Lomachenko, well, that's pretty fucking anticlimactic.
it would be.
I'd be disappointed because that's what I've been waiting for all this time. The chance for those 2 boys to settle up, and I don't really got a horse in the race per se, I just want to see them fight so that all the narratives we've been hearing over the years can be laid to rest, so that we can reach some kind of catharsis.
I mean, think about it. If Devin stays at 135 pounds, but he don't fight Vasyl Lomachenko, who the hell is he going to fight?
There's only one way he stays at 135 pounds without fighting Vasyl Lomachenko, and that's to forfeit the brown belt, forfeit the WBO title. I'm sure that if it were to happen that way, Vasyl Lomachenko's critics and Devin Haney's apologists would quickly point to Vasyl Lomachenko petitioning for franchise status.
They'd likely say that Vasyl Lomachenko already swerved Devin Haney, telling only half the story.
He didn't fight Devin Haney because he was already en route to face the winner of Comey versus Lopez, and everybody knows that. I'm tired of arguing about this thing.
I'm tired of rehashing that, and I'm tired of bringing it up. I want to see a fight.
But there are content creators out there and those who claim to be boxing fans who don't.
They don't actually want these 2 guys to fight because they're afraid of what might happen.
They've already spent so much time propping up Devin Haney and talking down Vasyl Lomachenko that if it happens the other way and Vasyl Lomachenko beats him, well, they're gonna look pretty fucking stupid.
Yeah, they're gonna have some explaining to do.
While I might not have a horse in the race, while I'm just a guy who's in the market for a fight, these guys, they don't actually have faith. They're not completely sure that Devin Haney beats this guy. That's why they'd rather he don't fight him. Just find a way out of it so they don't have to deal with the consequences if they got it wrong.
It'll be like that whole Glovegate thing all over again. You made all those videos and talked all that jive just to be wrong.
Dead wrong. They don't want to have to go through that again because they've spent an inordinate amount of time talking down Vasyl Lomachenko and talking up Devin Haney. And if Vasyl Lomachenko ends up beating Devin Haney, well, they're gonna look pretty fucking stupid.
Not saying he will or won't, but if he does, you're the guys who are trashing him. You're the guys who are talking him down.
You're the guy saying that he's afraid of Devin Haney. So if he were to go in there and beat him, what then?
I really hope this fight happens.
And finally, just in keeping with the theme of lightweight news, Calvin Ford, Gervonta Davis's trainer, is back at it again, making empty promises.
He's saying Gervonta's going to fight Ryan Garcia and Vasyl Lomachenko. He's saying it's going to happen.
Yeah, he said that already.
He said that before.
Should Lomachenko emerge victorious, Bob Arum, his longtime promoter, will look to match the former titleist against Devin Haney, provided Haney defeats George Kambosos in their immediate rematch. Regardless of the direction of Vasyl Lomachenko's career, Ford, similarly to the way he views Garcia, is steadfast in his belief that both fighters, along with a slew of others, will face Davis when the time is right. It's gonna happen. Listen to what I'm saying. All of those fights are gonna happen. I just gotta wait until the stars and moons line up to make it happen.
You guys have been saying that since 2017.
Nobody believes you. I don't believe you. You know they get to doing this
whenever either Lomachenko or just some other fighter, some other super featherweight or some other lightweight is making news and making headlines, Gervonta Davis and his flunkies aren't far behind.
They're empty promises.
And the only guy that makes as many empty promises as Gervonta Davis, anywhere at or around these weights, is Ryan Garcia. But he's up there at 140 pounds now, whereas Gervonta, he's still down there at 135.
Earlier this year, wasn't it Ryan Garcia that said he's going to get Gervonta Davis in the ring?
I don't know, I think it was. I don't even pay attention anymore to either of those guys and the empty promises that they make, rather the empty promises that are sometimes made on their behalf. In this instance, Calvin Ford is back to making those empty promises, promising a Lomachenko fight, promising a Ryan Garcia fight that no one expects to happen. You know what's going to happen?
What?
He's either going to defend that WBA Reggie belt against Isaac Cruz for a second time. Isaac Cruz, who's been very vocal that he wants to have a rematch with Gervonta. Isaac Cruz, who's going to be in action this weekend on the undercard of Ruiz versus Ortiz. Beyond that fight, if he makes it through it, he either has a rematch with Gervonta or Gervonta moves up to 140. Maybe he challenges Alberto Puello for that WBA title now that it's on that side of the street.
I can think of a few fights that Gervonta Davis might have, and not a single one among them involves Devin Haney, involves Ryan Garcia, or Lomachenko.
Calvin Ford only mentions those guys because those guys have more of a profile than the fighters Gervonta Davis is fighting. Lomachenko, he's got more of a profile than a Rolly Romero, than an Isaac Cruz. Hell, he's got more of a profile than Alberto Puello, who I think Gervonta Davis might actually end up fighting.
Devin Haney's got more of a profile than that guy, too.
And if Gervonta Davis and his team, Calvin Ford among them, if what they really wanted was a Devin Haney fight, well, they could pursue it because they have a WBA regular title that can be used as a segue to fight for the full title. But you don't see them doing that, do you?
No, you don't, and you're not going to. They probably won't shoot for that full title until after Devin Haney vacates it.
If he actually vacates it. If he doesn't, I don't know. Maybe he has a rematch with Isaac, or maybe he moves up to 140 and challenges Alberto Puello, who's on the PBC side of things, for his full WBA title. I mean, by now you should know what to expect.
Gervonta Davis's fans often talk about this guy like he's got all this clout. Anyone who mentions him is, in essence, clout chasing.
When in reality, it's Calvin Ford that's doing all the clout chasing, name-dropping fighters he knows they're not pursuing, he knows they're not about to fight, yet he insists on talking about them anyway, making empty promises.
Gervonta Davis is set to come back in December.
And against who? It really doesn't even matter.
Because it won't be Loma, won't be Devin, won't be Ryan.